Fidelity High, the people you dig, the records they love.
Laura Jane Grace is the founder and frontwoman of the critically acclaimed punk rock band Against Me. Their fourth album and major label debut, New Wave, received overwhelming critical praise and was named Spin Magazine's Album of the Year in 2007. In 2012, Grace publicly came out as a transgender woman, and the band released their sixth album, Transgender Dysphoria Blues, at the beginning of 2014. Wired magazine said the album was an impressionistic, vibrant exploration of struggling with gender dysphoria and a budding identity, and Q magazine stated, "Throughout, Grace is brave and brutally honest." The same year of the album's release, Grace hosted the 10-part AOL original documentary series, True Trans with Laura Jane Grace, and also made the Advocate's 40 Under 40 list. Last year saw the release of her memoir, Tranny, Confessions of Punk Rock's Most Infamous Anarchist Sellout, which Publishers Weekly called a riveting and at times harrowing biography, and a brutally honest, soul-searching memoir. 2016 also saw the release of Against Me's seventh studio album, Shapeshift with Me. Issued on the band's own label, Total Trouble Music, The Enemy said it was an excellent album and called Grace an essential cultural figure.
Hey, this is Laura Jane Grace, and my Fidelity High is Full Moon Fever by Tom Petty. So to set the scene of where I was the first time I heard Full Moon Fever, came out in 1989, and at the time I was living in Naples, Italy. My father was stationed there in the military, and so I was existing in a vacuum in that we didn't have an MTV or anything like that. And I got my first CD player, and accompanying that first CD player, my dad gave me a copy of Full Moon Fever. So that was my very first CD that I got. You know, I've never had the chance to talk to my dad really about this or ask him why he got me a Tom Petty CD, because I don't think my dad was necessarily a Tom Petty fan. You know, it wasn't like I had ever heard my dad listening to his music before, and that's not, you know, Full Moon Fever is not Tom Petty's first record or anything like that. So it was like just completely random feeling, and so setting the scene further of where I was first time I listened to it, I was in my bedroom alone with my very first like stereo boombox that had a CD player on it. My first impressions of the music up until then, preceding that, when I got a Walkman when we moved to Italy. So I got it, like, my parents got me a Walkman for the flight, I think, essentially. Like, here, amuse yourself with this. And my first cassette to go along with that Walkman was a copy of Def Leppard's Hysteria. And, you know, the combination of, like, I had a couple other cassettes that I was listening to, and I definitely, like, was into, like, similar bands to Def Leppard. And I got the Def Leppard record just because the cover looked cool, you know? But I would buy music like that. Does this cover look cool? And so I listened to Guns N' Roses, and I listened to, like, you know, Warrant and similar bands. And the combination of, like, those quality of recordings and the fact that they were on cassette, I just remember how bright and large Full Moon Fever sounded. It was, like, so not, like... Hysteria is a record that, if you know anything about the recording of it, like, they, like, were exhausting in getting all the harmonies so tight, and, like, you know, every part of that record is so polished and perfect and multi-tracked and layered and very condensed and compressed, that Full Moon Fever just seemed so bright and so open. And I just remember how, like, distinctive that sound. It's, you know, and again, part of it was that it was on CD, so there was that clarity too, but it was so bright and open sounding, and just, I hadn't heard anything necessarily like that up until that point. And, you know, just looking on the cover alone, I don't think I would have picked out buying that record. Just for an 8-year-old or a 9-year-old, it wasn't a very exciting looking record cover. It's just Tom Petty there with his guitar, you know, and there's some color to it, but it didn't scream like rock and roll to me, you know. But it quickly became my favorite record. For me, music was a very independent thing. And while my parents did make those efforts to make music a part of my life, I still don't understand necessarily why. We weren't a very musical family. Like my dad was a major in the United States Army, worked for NATO. My mother, she really liked Tracy Chapman. I remember her listening to that album like all the time when we first moved to Italy. And, there was like a little bit of music, but again, neither of my parents played instruments. There were no instruments around the house. And it seemingly would go against, the military life of like getting your kid into rock and roll and being rebellious, but it was there. And for me, like going to the PX and being able to pick out a record once every like 2 or 3 weeks was like something I really looked forward to. And amongst my group of friends at school, we definitely, started sharing like dubbed cassette tapes and would introduce each other to different stuff. But I'm thankful for existing in that period of time without MTV to guide my choices in music, because it did end up that I would be like 1 second listening to MC Hammer, the next second listening to Tom Petty, the next second listening to U2, to Guns N' Roses, to, I just liked what I liked, and I didn't like it because I thought the people looked cool even. I just liked the records I liked.
On Thanksgiving Day in 1987, Tom Petty ran into producer and Electric Light Orchestra frontman Jeff Lynne in Los Angeles. Lynne had produced George Harrison's just-released Cloud 9 album and was currently producing Brian Wilson of the Beach Boys' solo debut. Petty and Lynne began work on a handful of songs and decided to cut demos at Heartbreakers guitarist Mike Campbell's garage studio. The pair was so happy with the results, what began as relaxed demos became proper sessions for Petty's debut solo album, Full Moon Fever. Guests on the record included Roy Orbison on backing vocals, George Harrison on guitar, as well as Heartbreakers band members Campbell, bassist Howie Epstein, and keyboardist Benmont Tench, among others. It also features Del Shannon performing barnyard noises behind a humorous interlude included on the CD version of Petty marking the point where cassette and vinyl listeners would be flipping to side B of the album. During the recording of Full Moon Fever, the Traveling Wilburys, the supergroup comprised of Petty and Lynne, alongside George Harrison, Bob Dylan, and Roy Orbison, was formed. Halfway through the Full Moon Fever sessions, the group began work on their acclaimed debut, The Traveling Wilburys Volume 1, which was released a year before Petty's solo debut hit record store shelves.
Technically, like all of my first live performances were me with a tennis racket in my bedroom strumming along to Full Moon Fever and lip syncing to the record in front of my mirror. I would like dance. I would do it for hours, and I don't know. I just knew at a very young age that's what I wanted to do. And it's like talking about like not really understanding that record at the time, where I didn't know all the players that were on it. I didn't know who Jeff Lynne was. I didn't know Roy Orbison had anything to do with Tom Petty. I didn't know that Tom Petty had a full musical career before he released Full Moon Fever. To me, this was just this album that just came out into existence, and it could have been his only record he ever made. And my family, my dad was from like Pennsylvania area, my mother was from Ohio, and I don't know if my dad had any kind of pre-existing love for Tom Petty. And I really honestly like to look at me getting a copy of Full Moon Fever as fate, because there was really no way to predict what would happen next in my life. And, a couple years later, flash forward, my parents get divorced and I moved to Florida. I moved to South Florida. And then when I was 18 years old, I moved to Gainesville, Florida, which is where Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers are from. Before that, when I was like 12 years old and I had graduated from playing an acoustic guitar to earning my first electric guitar, my dad got me a Traveling Wilburys model Gretsch electric guitar, which is what I started all my first grunge bands on, and that was my first electric guitar. And I had no idea who the Traveling Wilburys were. That was just the electric guitar that he got me. I didn't even know Tom Petty was in the Traveling Wilburys. I didn't listen to the Traveling Wilburys until years after that, but that was my first electric guitar. So again, it was like first CD, Full Moon Fever, first electric guitar, Traveling Wilburys guitar, moved to Gainesville, Florida when I'm 18. And I obviously like became obsessed with the sound of a Rickenbacker guitar at a really young age from listening to that record and from that image of Tom Petty sitting on the cover with a Rickenbacker guitar. I just like, it was ingrained in me that that's the coolest electric guitar. And I love the chimey, high-end, trebly sound of a Rickenbacker guitar. So the second, my band started making any money, I was like, I want to buy a Rickenbacker guitar, because that was what the sound I grew up listening to, and that's what Tom Petty played. And I became, fairly obsessed with, I'm not sure if it's still there, but Stan Lynch, who was the drummer from the Heartbreakers, he had a store in, a music instrument store in Gainesville. And I bought I think it was a 76 or 78 twin reverb off of him. That is the amplifier that I've used to record every single Against Me record. And then I also bought a 64 mint condition Fender Jaguar off of him. And I paid way too much money for it, but it was just because there was a slight chance that maybe Tom Petty had picked up that guitar in a studio once and played around on it, Before this tour started, I was sitting at home and I was playing along to Tom Petty songs, and I was playing on that Jaguar, and I had it in my headphones. I was like, this really sounds like it could have been on this record. I was like, oh, it fucking could have. I forgot the connection to it. But so again, it's this balance of I don't know how much of that was just fate and how much of it was at me after the fact pursuing it. But Tom Petty has always had an influence on my life, starting with Full Moon Fever. So a couple weeks ago, the day that Tom Petty died, we were on tour, and I was sitting here in the back lounge of this bus, and I was like, okay, what do I do with the rest of my day? This is pretty heavy. And I was like, well, I should probably just sit back here and smoke joints and go back and listen to all of Full Moon Fever, and I'm going to write out every song. So I did. I went through and I wrote out right here. I wrote out all the lyrics and all the chords and relearned all of Full Moon Fever and just spent my days sitting there doing that. And it was the first time I had ever done that, where I'd really sat down and been like, okay, well, that's the structure for this song and these are the chords. And it's incredible because all of the songs are really easy songs. When you strip away the full band accompaniment, Free Falling is A, D, D, A, E, that's the song. That song was everywhere. That song's ubiquitous. That song is a huge song, and it's 3 chords, and so many of his songs are like that. And they just it really reminded me, looking at it, of that's the essence of songwriting, and that's that you don't need a bunch of frills, and it's not about that. All the songs on Full Moon Fever are so ingrained in me that I know them. I can sing along with them on a record, no problem. I don't need a lyric sheet or anything like that. And if I were to sit down and listen by ear, I could figure it out. But my band doesn't have a history of covering Tom Petty songs, and it was by the time I got my acoustic guitar and electric guitar and had learned to play, as I said, I started all my first grunge cover bands on my Traveling Wilburys guitar. So I was ripping Even Flow and Pearl Jam songs on that guitar, and playing Smells Like Teen Spirit on that guitar, and had kind of passed on from being interested. I didn't follow Tom Petty's career after that. It was just this blip of, and here's Full Moon Fever, and after that, once I moved back to the States, then I was introduced to Tom Petty as a video artist. And, at the time, definitely he had really compelling music videos that were always played on MTV that really stood out, Into the Great Wide Open, even Last Dance with Mary Jane, all those were really compelling music videos that I never minded when they came on, no matter how much they were played. Whereas some videos that were in a rotation on MTV, it was oh my God, I cannot watch or listen to this song again. But it always seemed like Tom Petty was really doing his own thing and just kind of there, but Full Moon Fever always stood as its own thing for me.
5 singles were released from Full Moon Fever, with 3 becoming massive hits at radio. The songs Free Fallin', Runnin' Down a Dream, and I Won't Back Down all topped the mainstream rock radio charts, and the video for Free Fallin' was nearly inescapable on MTV. To date, Full Moon Fever has sold over 5 million copies, with Rolling Stone magazine calling it one of the top 100 albums of the 1980s.
For me, Full Moon Fever, I did not know as a record for having produced massive hits, because I wasn't, I have I'm so thankful that I have a different relationship with the song Free Falling than probably most people who lived in the US did at that time, where I did not have the video hammered into me over and over and over. So it wasn't beat to death, and I was able to maintain a love for Free Falling, but knowing like the impact after the fact that all the songs had on or the singles had, and like what a big record it was, like it's, and looking at the songs now and knowing how simple like the chord structures are and everything like that, and the approach to songwriting, I can't have anything but respect for, and is really, to me, I can see the way that Tom Petty influenced me over the years,
Throughout the summer of 2017, Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers celebrated their 40th anniversary as a band with a national tour, which Petty told Rolling Stone magazine was intended to be his last trip around the country. A week following the tour's final dates, a 3-night stand at the Hollywood Bowl in Los Angeles, Petty died from cardiac arrest on October 2nd, 2017. He was 66 years old.
The impact of Tom Petty passing is really, obviously there's been, unfortunately, a couple similar moments over the past couple of years of like real luminaries passing away, and artists that you almost took for granted that they would just always be there, and didn't really realize the full scope of their music or their catalog or what it means to have a body of work like that. And I've taken the opportunity each time, someone who was a hero to me like that has passed away, to go back and look at like their body of work and what they accomplished in their life and what their approaches were, to watch interviews, to listen to them talk, to listen to and try and figure out like what drove them as an artist and what their approach was, what their work ethic was, or how they what they literally did when they woke up in the morning, where they felt comfortable existing, how they approached touring. Just even because I hope for myself to have a similar long career, and what it takes to do something like that. And, you can't help but just say thanks, thank you for all that music. Thank you for all those memories attached to that music. And thank you for doing what you did, and not having a personal relationship with somebody. I never met Tom Petty. I just had a relationship with his music. It's like a different form of grieving and a different way that you process something. And to me, that has been, going through and learning songs and paying attention to the songwriting. And, each night we've been taking a moment on stage to talk about it. And we've been throwing a couple songs into the set. And it's tough. We've been doing Running Down a Dream, and you play Running Down a Dream, and we've been doing it in the middle of the set. And then the next song you play afterwards, it's impossible to not think, I am not as good of a songwriter as Tom Petty. I really need to up my game. It is so fun playing Tom Petty songs. It is not as fun playing my own songs. But, that's truth. And that's you should be humbled by that. And it should make you strive to be a better songwriter and to do more with less, specifically, knowing learning to fly, it's 3 chords. If you can't do something with 3 chords similar, you're just not as good of a songwriter, and you need to keep working at it. And you realize it's the combination of you can do whatever after to a song. You can throw ripping guitar solos on it. You get the best drummer, do awesome drum fills, whatever. You can do whatever with the production of it. But at its core, it just has to be a solid song that exists on an acoustic guitar. And I really believe that was Tom Petty's ultimate approach. And from what I've read, interview-wise and listening to him speak, that it was always that, you bring the skeleton of a song and then you want to be in a band. And and that was always, I think, something that I got from him too, is that even though he did solo records, and that was something that I think, is indicated by doing solo records, but still wanting to bring those songs back to the band, is that Tom Petty ultimately wanted to be in a band. I want to be in a band. You want that. You want to be in a gang, and it's you all against the world, not just yourself,
Thank you to Laura Jane Grace, and thanks for listening to this episode of Fidelity High. All episodes of Fidelity High are currently available for download via iTunes and at fidelityhigh.com.